So I'm working on the bulletin for next week and some weeks ahead. And coming up this Sunday is going to be one of those drum rolls where all the Bible study folks are going to know what's going on better than everyone else in the pews, because Sunday the first reading is from First Samuel, chapter 16, and it begins. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul?" So to look out for that. It's a passage that's kind of leading up to David and Goliath, but the David and Goliath story comes much later in our lectionary. But there you go. Also, this coming Sunday, we get Psalm 23, which is attributed to King David, and that's the famous "Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want." So, okay, there's your little head start. I think we're on chapter 21 today, but before we get into it, I want to do a little housekeeping, which is, well, you'll probably finish next week, 2 Samuel, and then we'll be done with the Samuels. I will not be here next week because I'll be driving to Cleveland for a quarterly meeting with the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music. But in my absence, what I'll probably do is leave with Charity or Lauren a link to a YouTube video that kind of summarizes First and Second Samuel, since we're kind of bringing them to a close, so you can think back fondly over these last 5-6 months or so as we've read onto it. But on terms of housekeeping, so that means 2 weeks from today, which would be, that's not Holy Week, it's the week before Holy Week. So somewhere around, I can't do math. Today is, so the 29th, we can start something new. And I just wanted to see what you all might be interested in studying.
Oh dear.
Guys, the limit.
Well, people are thinking, can I ask a question? And I'm sure you've answered this before, but I don't remember it.
Oh, but I'm happy to re-answer.
So I know that is there a reason why the books of the Bible go the order they do? Like after you do Samuel, I see in mind, then it comes Kings. So is there a reason why? Like, is that because of the time they were written? Like, I don't remember why.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm a little foggy on the details of the Old Testament canon or the Hebrew scriptures, but generally speaking, it's a great question, Barb. It's the first 5 are the original 5 books of the law, or the Torah, the teaching. So we got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then we move into the writings and or the Ketuvim, and they are generally more kind of histories or historical narratives. So we got Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and now we're in First and Second Samuel. First and Second Kings, and again, for those who might not remember, First and Second Samuel is really one big book, but it was divided into 2 scrolls because it was so long. So that's how it gets split into 2 books to this day. Same thing with Kings. It's one big scroll, and so we got First Kings and Second Kings. After that is First and Second Chronicles, which is a retelling of the events of First and Second Kings, but from a different perspective, a different community telling the same exact stories. From that point on, it's a bit of a game of trying to figure out what the early editors were thinking, and it's kind of mostly it's a large chunk of prophets. You'll get Proverbs in there. I'd have to do some research off the top of my head. I bet David has some thoughts though. No, oh no, okay, good.
No, I think you've covered it. They're just divided according to the types of literature they are with the law, and then the history, and then we've got called wisdom literature and the Psalms, and then the prophets. Yeah, that's it.
Yep. Which is actually really helpful because you kind of, generally speaking, can flip through the Old Testament and know generally the first third is the law. The next third-ish is history and narratives, and then it's the last third is, I mean, it's not quite thirds, but for lack of a better word, then the last whole section is prophets, and they kind of the prophets are a lot shorter generally, except for Jeremiah and Isaiah. that help a little, Barb?
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
So when we think about things we could do next, in the past, we have jockeyed back and forth between Old Testament and New Testament. I suspect you all would like to return to the New Testament a little bit. I am more than happy, we're on a 5-year cycle with me that it's maybe time to do a gospel again. We haven't done a gospel in a while, and we are in.
Did you guys do Matthew yet?
Well, we did when I first got here, so it's a whole different makeup of people. Maybe it's worth doing Matthew again, and just seeing what we think, especially after reading so much of the Old Testament. But don't let me lead you. I'm just suggesting. Some of the books we've done already are Romans, Galatians, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Hebrews. In the Old Testament, we've done Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Did we do Leviticus? I think we did.
Yes.
And 1st and 2nd Samuel. We've done the Apocrypha, or one of the Apocrypha, which was not Hosea. It was great. It was so great, I can't remember its name. Is anything jumping out to anybody that they'd like to do?
Greg, way
Yeah.
back a long time,
We did Tobit.
Tobit, thank you. ahead.
we did Ruth, like a really long, like books of the Bible that never made it into the Bible.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not that I know a lot about the Bible, but are there other ones that maybe we want to consider that didn't make it into the Bible?
Sure.
So
Thomas?
that's just my thought.
Yeah. What do you think, everybody?
So is that from the Apocrypha? Is that what you're talking about?
It could be the Apocrypha, or she might also be referring to one time we did, I think we did about maybe 2 books that were supposed to be in the New Testament that did not make it into the New Testament canon. So the Gospel of Thomas.
Mhm.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. There's some other Gospels out there. Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Gospel of Peter. Any thoughts, anybody? And we don't have to decide right now. I just want to make sure I get all the thoughts out, and if we do one, we could go and do the other suggestion too right after that.
Okay.
All right. Well, if you think of something else, go ahead, Greg.
What if we kind of ruminate about it, and then next Wednesday we try to come to a decision?
That sounds
Since we
great.
since we still have next Wednesday to cover things.
Yes, perfect. And I'll come up with a little list you can vote on.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Very democratic. Right. One of the things I learned from John Meacham at this conference I was at last week, great speech he gave. Let me start searching for it so I can share it with you all. But he was saying, we have to remember democracy is really, really difficult. It's not, democracy goes against human nature. And that was just something that kind of, was a bit of a knife in the heart to a lot of us. But we see why, there's the things that make America so special is because democracy is just so difficult, and why it is so fragile. Anyway, it was a really thought-provoking speech. I will try my best to find a recording of that and send it around. Okay, chapter 21. Would anyone like to read? Maybe verses 1 to 14?
I can do.
I will. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mayor.
Go ahead, Mary. We'd love to have you read.
Okay. The title in this Bible is called Avenging the Gibeonites. There was a famine for 3 years. How long do you want me to read, by the way?
Oh, go to verse 14 and we'll pause and discuss.
Okay. There was a famine for 3 years in a row during David's rule. David asked the Lord about this, and the Lord said, "It is caused by Saul and his household, who are guilty of bloodshed because he killed the people of Gideon." So the king called for the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites weren't Israelites, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn a solemn pledge to spare them, but Saul tried to eliminate them in his enthusiasm for the people of Israel and Judah. David said to the Gibeonites, "What can I do for you? How can I fix matters so you can benefit from the Lord's inheritance?" The Gibeonites said to him, "We don't want any silver or gold from Saul or his family, and it isn't our right to have anyone in Israel killed." "What do you want?" David asked. "I'll do it for you." "Okay, then," I said to the king, "that man who opposed and oppressed us, who planned to destroy us, keeping us from having a place to live anywhere in Israel, hand over 7 of the sons to us, and we will hang them before the Lord at Gibeon on the Lord's mountain." "I will hand them over," the king said. But the king spared Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson, because of the Lord's solemn pledge that was between them, between David and Saul's son, Jonathan. So the king took the 2 sons of Aiah's daughter Rizpah, Harmony and Mephibosheth, whom she had birthed for Saul, and the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, whom she birthed for Adriel, Barzillai's son, who was from Meholah, and he handed them over to the Gibeonites. They hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. The 7 of them died at the same time. They were executed in the first days of the harvest, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Aiah's daughter Rizpah took funeral clothing and spread it out by herself on a rock. She stayed there from the beginning of the harvest until the rains poured down on the bodies from the sky, and she wouldn't let any birds of prey land on the bodies during the day or let wild animals come at nighttime. When David was told what Aiah's daughter Rizpah, Saul's second wife, had done, he went and retrieved the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the cities of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen the bones from the public square in Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them on the day of the Philistines killed Saul at Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there and collected the bones of the men who had been hanged by the Gibeonites. The bones of Saul and his son Jonathan were then buried in Zelah, in Benjaminite territory, in the tomb of Saul's father Kish. Once everything the king had commanded was done, God responded to prayers for the land.
Thank you.
Mary, what version are you reading from? I'm just curious.
The Woman's Bible.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Because it's interesting how these translations can be quite different at times. The one that I have, these people were not hanged, they were dismembered. That's a
Ooh.
huge difference.
Oh,
Yes.
That's a huge difference. And then the one woman they referred to as Saul's wife in this version, it says she was a concubine. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me how translators can come up with such different words from the same source.
Yes, I agree. It tells you it tells you more about the translator than it does the text sometimes.
Yeah.
Translator might be uncomfortable with dismemberment and say, well, hanged, or concubines are uncomfortable because it means that the king had many wives.
Mhm.
I would just say, his wife, right?
Mhm.
Kind of a nice little smear of gloss over the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah, what are some thoughts or reactions here? Good job with all the many names, Mary. Big words.
They are.
That brings a question to mind, Greg. Overall, we've all stumbled over some of these names for months now. Is there some kind of a small book that actually has phonetic pronunciations of those names?
Boy, there sure is, and it is in. It's in my sitting in
There
my.
is. Yeah, there is. And I have a guide to pronouncing biblical names. It's by TSK Scott Craig. It's a Morehouse book. And basically it gives you a list. It's alphabetical.
Mhm.
So if I look up here at Jehoram, it is Jehoram. The phonetic pronunciation is next to it. Doesn't say how much this book was, and I'm pretty sure I picked it up at a convention bookstore.
Mhm.
Yes, and I have one too. It's green, and I think it's just called Bible Pronunciations, and it's in my office, and I welcome anyone to go snoop around looking for it if you'd like.
Okay.
We used to keep one in the lectern up at the altar in the church for readers. Mostly because people were showing up the day of not knowing, we were used to pick readers on the spot and then give them all these names. So they had something to go by at least. I don't know why I don't think that book is still up there. I think we were having some physical problems getting that binder shoved back in with the book in there, but that's a great question. Of course, you could also Google,
And a corollary question is that book that you have, does that also have pronunciation for place names, not just people's names?
Yep.
Okay, that would be very helpful, actually. Yeah.
Yep. It's funny. I just watched Lauren walk by. I bet she's going to go look for it. On it.
A lot of these names
Like-
have been, a lot of these names have been anglicized.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that makes an additional difficulty. I did, and Greg, I looked up the word that they use for what happened to the people, the sons of Saul, and it's a word, the Hebrew word, you can correct me on my pronunciation, is yaka, and it means literally to sever oneself, be dislocated, abandon, or impale. So all these different translations, they're trying to give meaning to a term in Hebrew that maybe isn't completely specific, and they're referring to probably methods of execution that were current at the time of the writing of the particular version or translation. So there is the sense of being torn apart, or that is possible. And very often, sometimes, I don't know if you're familiar, but a lot of times people who were hung were also what they call quartered, which means they were torn into pieces. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And grisly all at once.
It is grisly.
Another pronunciation method that if you Google it, there's YouTube channels
Oh, really?
of Old and New Testament pronunciations. Which
Oh,
is nice
okay.
for me because then I get the auditory cue versus trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure
Okay.
it out.
One of the things you just said about being grisly that impressed me about the whole thing was basically he just, in order to get the curse of God off of them, he was willing to send the sons of Saul to be executed, to be killed.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of grisly in itself. What does that say? What does that say about their belief in God, that they were willing to do this? That it's only slightly removed from human sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right.
Mm.
You know what? I have a question. It says here in verse 7, it says, but the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son Jonathan. And then it goes down farther. The king took the two sons of Rizpah's daughter, Armani and Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth.
And so the 5 sons of Merab. So he didn't save Mephibosheth, or is this a different Mephibosheth?
No, he saved Mephibosheth, but he executed Mephibosheth's sons.
Yeah. king
Oh.
took 2 sons of Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, Armani, and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Meribs. Right? Is if they're not naming the sons, they're saying who the sons' fathers are. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's confusing unless you take a slow backup to look at it.
I wonder how this made David look to the people in to the the Israelites, how they felt about him turning over Saul's sons to be executed. Yeah.
Exactly.
It,
Conflicted.
it sort of feels, the word tribal is in my mind, and thinking that this is a culture similar to other originating cultures, and the fact that their God looks like this and that they're doing this is very similar to some of the other tribes in the world, more primitive tribes. And I hadn't really thought about it that way.
And in order to make up for it, then they went and got the bones of Saul and Jonathan and buried them, which in some way was supposed to atone for this, I guess.
It sounds, I wonder if you mean, when you said tribal, Mary, I thought Native American for some reason, and no, but I felt kind of the same way about just how things like, how we treat things like the remains and the bones, and
Mhm.
there's kind of a much more spiritual connection to these things than just a lasting. Yeah, obviously you're talking about different tribes, but yeah. A man of great size with 6 fingers on each hand.
Oh.
Coming up. Okay, I was reading ahead. Sorry, it's coming up. Would someone like to read, or maybe Mary, you want to finish 15 to 22?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Once again, war broke out between the Philistines and Israel. David and the soldiers who were with him went down and fought the Philistines. When David grew tired, Ishbi-Benob, a descendant of the Rapha, planned on killing David. The weight of his spear was 300 shekels of bronze, and he was wearing new armor. But Zeruiah's son, Abishai, came to David's aid, striking the Philistine down and killing him. Then David's men swore a solemn pledge to him. You will never march out to battle with us again. You must not snuff out Israel's lamp. Sometime later, another battle with the Philistines took place at Gob. Then Sibbecai from Hushah killed Saph, a descendant of the Rapha. There was yet another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and Ilhanan, Jair's son from Bethlehem, killed Goliath from Gath, whose spear shaft was as strong as the bar on a weaver's loom. In another battle at Gath, there was a huge man who had 6 fingers on his hands and 6 toes on his feet, 24 in all. He too was descended from the Rapha. When he insulted Israel, Jonathan, who was the son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. These 4 Philistines were descended from the Rapha in Gath, and they fell by the hands of David and his servants.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are more than just echoes of what happened with David killing Goliath here, and it gives credit to someone else having killed Goliath from Gath, and then it talks about this giant with 6 fingers. It seems like several different chronologies have been jammed together here in this part. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not very clean. It's messy. Yeah.
So is this referring to the Goliath that David killed originally, or is this a different Goliath? I didn't understand that.
Well, that's not clear, Greg. That's the
Okay.
point. And And it could be the killing of Goliath from a different source. And it could be, separating Goliath and this 6-fingered guy and 6-foot guy. They could be the same person. It's hard to tell, but I think what is common in this kind of literature is the editor, the person who puts it together, takes a lot of these sources together and he puts them all in. And generally the way they edit is not to remove, but just to add additional passages. And you're just left with the contradictions. They understood that they weren't giving perfect information in every detail, but they're trying to get the general sense of the narrative. And so they were more than willing to let these contradictions stay within the narrative that they recorded.
Yeah, it would be a lot more understandable if this mishmash happened earlier on when David was a young man, you know, the original account of what happened. But now they're sticking it in here when David is an old man, to the point where his soldiers are saying, you don't go out to battle with us anymore because you can't handle it, basically, is what they're. So it's just odd to me what that does in terms of chronology. Maybe chronology was not all that important to the workings of those minds back then.
I think you're right, Greg. It wasn't the most important thing. It was, you know, it was the showing the relationship of the people with their God, and these things happen. And you've got to remember the writing of this. The when the author put this together is sometime in the period of exile, which is like 300-400 years later. So the tale gets lost. It's like how we don't understand everything about the founders of the United States, and we're just talking about a little over 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Correct.
You know, it's conjecture on my part because I don't have any resources in front of me, but I wouldn't be shocked if, you know, the story that is best known for those composing this book is the story of David as king, as an adult, and a lot of these wars and battles and those things. And that later separate stories, legends of young David, a bit like, as I mentioned in a sermon a few weeks ago, George Washington cutting down the cherry tree, how stories like that start to come into the collective consciousness, to the point that we lose semblance of what was real about David and what wasn't. And then they get written back into the story as part of the birth narrative. And I'm saying that to compare it to Jesus's story too, where a lot of his circumstances around his conception and birth are given over to myth a lot, and to underscore his importance. I think some of that happens here, but I think, like David said, you get some remnants of some of the splicing, as literally taping together these two stories, and that their hesitance to delete, but to add on and to leave the mess you've made there. But to get back to what I'm saying, the suspicion is that the story of David and Goliath came later, and then offered its own lessons, let's say, for Israel.
That's it. That's real insightful, Greg, because that's exactly what the New Oxford Annotated Bible says.
Yeah.
Dead center. It says that this particular account represents an earlier tradition than the first Samuel 17 concerning the death of Goliath, the otherwise unknown Elhanan, rather than David slays him. The story in 1 Samuel 17 is an elaboration and reworking of this tradition, attributing victory to the better known David. So yeah, you're right on target with that.
Well, a broken clock is right twice a day.
No.
At
least the New Oxford Annotated Bible agrees with you. I'm not sure.
Exactly.
Some of my fundamental friends would accept that, but yeah, I think
One of my footnotes here says too that the story we know from 1 Samuel 17, the Bethlehemite warrior who slew Goliath the Gittite was David, but this has led scholars to suggest that Elhanan, who was later in chapter 23 called son of Dodo, was another name for David. So there's some attempts to kind of fit this awkward piece into the narrative a bit, history here. But ultimately it's a bit of a mystery, you know.
It's just what happens when you try to harmonize all these scriptures that are clearly seem contradictory. It's an attempt to try to harmonize and get them to say all the same thing instead of accepting the Bible for what it is and the kind of literature it is and how it was developed and put together. So yeah, it presents a lot of problems for people who want to believe in a literal or a a verbal inspiration. It presents a lot of problems for them when they try to harmonize all these obvious contradictions or problems. Yeah.
All right, chapter 22, which is going to feature a song from David that might have some echoes that sound familiar to you. And I'm going to be doing some research in the background. Who would volunteer to read? Was that you, Barb?
Yeah, I'll do it from
Would you
the
like to do
message.
23
Yeah.
for the message? Yeah.
Isn't that right, Greg? She has to sing it. Different song.
Oh yeah, Barb, would you set it to music, please? Thank you.
See the room empty out quick?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
So you might want, Barb, you might want to stop wherever feels natural. It's a long piece of the whole thing is kind of a song. Maybe take a break midway through if you'd like. Yeah.
Okay. David prayed to God the words of this song after God saved him from all his enemies and from Saul. God is my bedrock under my feet, the castle in which I live, my rescuing knight. My God, the high crag, where I run for dear life, hiding behind the boulders, safe in the granite hideout. My mountaintop refuge. He saves me from ruthless men. I sing to God the praise lofty and find myself safe and saved. The waves of death crashed over me, devil waters rush over me. Hell's ropes cinched me tight, death traps barred every exit. A hostile world I called to my God I cried out. From his palace he heard me call, my cry brought me right into his presence, a private audience. Earth wobbled and lurched, the very heavens shook like leaves, quaked like aspen leaves because of his rage. His nostrils flared, billowing smoke, his mouth spit fire. Tongues of fire darted in and out, he lowered the sky. He stepped down. Under his feet an abyss opened up. He rode a winged creature, swift on wind wings. He wrapped himself in a trench coat of black rain cloud darkness. But his cloud brightness burst through, a grand comet of fireworks. Then God thundered out of heaven. The high God gave a great shout. God shot his arrows, pandemonium. He hurled his lightning, a rout. The secret sources of oceans were exposed. The hidden depths of earth laid uncovered. The moment God roared in protest, let loose his hurricane anger. But me he caught, reached all the way from sky to sea, he pulled me out. Of that ocean of hate, the enemy chaos, the void in which I was drowning. They hit me when I was down, but God stuck by me. He stood me up on a wide open field. I stood there saved, surprised to be loved. God made my life complete. When I placed all the pieces before him, when I picked up my axe, he gave me a fresh start. Indeed, I've kept alert to God's ways. I haven't taken God for granted. Every day I review the way he works. I try not to miss a trick. I feel put back together and I'm watching my step. God rewrote the text of my life when I opened the book of my heart to his eyes. You stick by people who stick with you. You're straight with people who are straight with you. You're good to good people. You shrewdly work around the bad ones. You take the side of the down and out, but the stuck up you take down a peg. Suddenly, God, your light floods my path. God drives out the darkness. I smash the bands of marauders. I vault the high fences. What a God. His road stretches straight and smooth. Every God direction is road tested. Everyone who runs towards him makes it. Is there any God like God? Are we not at bedrock? Is not this the God who armed me well, then aimed me in the right direction? Now I run like a deer on King of the Mountain. He shows me how to fight. I can bend a bronze bow. You protect me with salvation armor. You touch me and I feel 10 feet tall. You clear the ground under me, so my footing was firm. When I chased my enemies, I caught them. I didn't let go till they were dead men. I nailed them. They were down for good. Then I walked all over them. You armed me well for this fight. You smashed the upstart. You made my enemies turn tail, and I wiped out the haters. They cried, Uncle, but Uncle didn't come. They yelled for God and got no for an answer. I ground them to dust. They gusted in the wind. I threw them out like garbage in the gutter. You rescued me from a squabbling people. You made me a leader of nations. People I've never heard of served me. The moment they got wind of me, they submitted. They gave up. They came trembling from their hideout. Live, God, blessing to my rock, my towering salvation, God. This God set things right for me and shut up the people who talked back. He rescued me from my enemy's anger. He pulled me from the grip of upstart. You saved me from the bullies. That's why I'm thanking you, God, all over the world. That's why I'm singing songs that rhyme your name. God's king takes the trophy. God's chosen is beloved. I mean David and all his children, always.
Well done.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
So be remiss if there's not a movie tie-in here, but it might be a little loose. If you see the movie Elvis that was up for some Oscars, there's this fantastic sequence where, you know, Elvis's early hit was That's All Right Mama, which the movie takes pains to show Elvis being influenced by Black musicians. It might be giving him a little too much credit. I think a little bit more just stole it, didn't really get down and play with Black musicians as the movie shows it. But the movie, much like this book, is doing different work than a straight on history. It's a biography. It's a biopic. And there's a later sequence in the film where it's later Elvis, you know, quote unquote fat Elvis in the 70s, and he's on stage with his band and he's working out with all the musicians a new arrangement of That's All Right Mama. And he just kind of starts by getting the piano player to play a kind of boogie woogie of the music. And then as he's doing that, he says, okay, and now horns, do this, do ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba, and then they imitate it. And he goes, and backup singers, you start doing this. And it makes it look like he made it up on the spot. And it's probably did not happen that way, but it was a great way to just illustrate, oh, wow, you know, Elvis brought some musicality to the music. He wasn't just a parrot on stage playing someone else's music. This is, to me, akin to the art of David and Psalms. The attribution for all of these Psalms, 150 of them later in the book of Psalms. It's virtually impossible that he would have actually sat down and written them, but you wouldn't want to rule it out. There must have been some kind of tradition that David was musical, which is why he ends up with a lyre in his hand in a lot of paintings. Maybe he's musically inclined. Maybe he did write some Psalms, who knows, or pieces of them. But it's unlikely that he sat down and wrote and crafted all of this music. So when you have the authors or the original writers of this book trying to work that back in, they have David crafting something like a psalm right here before our very eyes.
Mhm.
And here it is late in his life. You know, the last chapter said he was weary, as in, you know, he's getting old. And it seems like there's going to be no more battles or victories, you know, and to be had. And he's just giving thanks for all the blessings of his life, forgetting the fact of all the traumas and all the times he's, you know, conquested and raped and all of these other things. But nevertheless, there's this tradition in the Psalms of either having Psalms of lament or Psalms of thanksgiving. So lament is like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Thanksgiving is, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, in whom I take refuge. And that's where this one would classify under as, but it's not a psalm, but it is in many ways probably written in here to give some authenticity to the Psalms we know and love. For example, Psalm 18 begins like this: I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield, and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold, and so on and so forth. All of these things that are praiseworthy of God, and lists all the ways that people are faulted them, but that God was consistent and God was the rock. You know, we hear that phrase a lot, the rock. So I just want to give a little bit of that setting or the kind of ambiance to it all, if you will, of what's going on here, because there's a lot of beautiful phrases in here that evoke some Psalms literally and some things we've never heard before. What are some other things in this song of David, this song of thanksgiving, that you like or that you're responding to?
Well, I was just gonna read what I have here on
Oh, good.
on my NRSV thing. It says, this psalm, which is essentially the same as Psalm 18, which you mentioned, written long after David's time, but is inserted here as appropriate to his sentiments. The psalm praises the Lord for appearing to rescue the psalmist and for continued support of the psalmist's military activities. Its placement following the exploits of David's heroes and David's rescue is appropriate. So that, and then it goes in and talking more about the psalm itself. I was just saying, yeah, this psalm was not necessarily written by David. It was put in here by the writer of 2 Samuel
to evoke David in many ways. And that commentary is key because it reminds us too that there's a nationalist background to this big time, right? You know, I'm trying to think of a comparable American tune. Not the Star Spangled Banner, of course, but you know, it would be like if there was a song for the Nazi Party pre-Hitler or around Hitler's time, you know, of just how great is Hitler.
Yeah, it's interesting that militaristic view here and how that contrasts with what Jesus shared in some of his attitudes. That just struck me that it's very much a product of its time, both in terms of the militarism and God showing himself by helping them defeat their enemies and massacre them. And it also is interesting in is it doesn't really present God, even at the time of the exile, as the only God. It more or less it shows him more as the Most High or their God. It's monolatry rather than absolute monotheism. So there's some interesting contrasts. You look at these passages like here, and even in the Psalms, they have the imprecatory Psalms where they, you know, and you look at these passages in the Old Testament, and you understand where some people today get their understanding, the way they believe God to be, and what they expect God's people to do or are able to do, willing to do. It's just a real interesting contrast.
Yeah.
Well, in the Women's Bible, the note is interesting in some ways. David's Thanksgiving psalm is a warrior king's celebration of the ways in which he has experienced God's blessings, especially in the context of battles. The song invokes the Lord as a mountain fortress and a protective shield. The Lord for David is the one who responds to his cries for deliverance from death, who manifests awesome power in natural phenomenon, who deals justly with humankind, who gives David victory over his enemies, and especially who has made him a powerful king. If, as contemporary Christian teachers suggest, God comes to us disguised as our life, then this song invites us to appreciate ancient and masculine perspective of this psalm, while also being open to how God's power and presence are manifest in our own particular experiences. I'm having trouble identifying with what they're saying here, but it may be a bridge to how more conservative people try to relate to it.
Yes. I'm just grasping, trying to think of an American example of the song, because ours tend to be not as specific to war, but more about God. You know, God shed his grace on thee and things like that. You know, a little more generalized, but sometimes they can deviate towards a little bit of that heroic God is our savior in battle kind of God, you know.
Greg,
Yes.
during World War II, one of the very, very popular songs was Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was also Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer.
On a wing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mother's generation, everyone probably knew those songs because they lived through the World War II.
Sure.
Maybe Dixie.
Oh,
This is New King James.
Southern men, the thunders mutter, northern flanks and south winds flutter, to arms, to arms, to arms, and Dixie, send them back your fierce defiance, stamped upon the cursed alliance, to arms, to arms, to arms, and Dixie. Chino was the kind of the song of the South in the Civil War, but then Lincoln, in the week he was alive after the end of the war, before he was killed, it was coming up on anniversary of that, actually, in a couple of weeks. He had the American band play Dixie because he loved the song.
Actually, if you look at the Star Spangled Banner, especially
Yeah.
some of the
That's
verses,
right.
it's pretty militant. Yeah, it's
Pretty
pretty much a hymn that has helped us triumph in battle. And it's
Well, Francis Scott Key was a very devout Episcopalian at the time. He worshiped at Virginia Seminary and St. Paul's Church, where I used to work. And you see some of that over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in there. Sounds so much like, you know, it's almost as if he had this reading at his disposal and was thinking about talking of comets bursting forth, coals of fire flaming forth. You know, it's not a far stretch, in other words, to say.
And also if you look at the next to the last stanza, there's a reference to Francis Scott Key's racism that may be partly due to the fact that he had just recently been defeated in battle by a group of black soldiers. But if you look at the next to the last verse, the 1, 2, 3, third verse, it talks about no refuge could save the hiring and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. So it's
Wow.
I
forgot there were other verses.
Yeah, there are 4 at least.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering what Christian, well, what pacifists do with all this, you know? I mean, do they just reject it as part of our, you know, historic development? Or, I mean, I never thought about that because yeah, I want to find out about that because I'm interested in Amish teachings in the way of life, and also some really conservative. I just wonder, you know, what's done with that in those denominations.
Right.
They believe quite clearly, that Jesus is the perfect expression of God. And they believe that there was an evolving understanding of what God was like and what God
Oh.
expected. That's a basic answer. At least it'll get you started. I've studied these churches and things like that and where they come from. And yeah, we've been to the Anabaptist Museum in Indiana. Where's that? Let's help me out. Shipshewana.
Yeah.
So
Joanna.
yeah, that's an interesting. If you're interested, you know, in that heritage, that's a good place to go for a reference for that.
It's there once they were thrilled.
And yes, okay, Jackie.
I don't know what she's saying, but just okay. I know I can ask cynical things, but more like devil's advocate. Okay, just roll with me. I'm not. So we talk about all people are people, and you know, respect all people, but yet, for you have armed me with strength in the battle. You have subdued me under those who rose against me. You have also given me the necks of my. Obviously, my version's a little different. It's also given me the necks of my enemies, so that I may destroy those who hated me. They looked, but there was none to save them, even the Lord, but he did not answer them. You know, years ago when I was in high school, or even Sophie's learning it now, just like coach is teaching her, you do your best. She's in water, you know, you want to win. But remember, when you win, it means somebody else lost. You win with dignity and you learn with respect. When obviously a war is a huge, you know, stretch from that, but when you win in a war, you have taken the life of another. Are we saying then that we are greater than those that we killed? And if so, because we prayed to God? I mean, you look at a baseball game, both sides pray. You know, you're going to get a player on both sides that pray. Why are we greater to then kill the other?
It's interesting if you look at the early church, the early Christian church within the first century or two of Jesus' death. They were ardently pacifistic. They didn't really, if someone was going to be baptized and they were a soldier or something, they had to either renounce their being a soldier or they had to promise they wouldn't kill. They were ardently pacifistic. It wasn't until people came along later after Constantine and the Christian church was united with empire that they began to develop theology that justified just war, which comes from Aquinas, I believe. He came up with the or Augustine was he developed the concept of just war, that you could kill people with certain reasons with certain principles in place. You could kill them, but you couldn't hate them, you know, and things like that. And that's very much a product of the church as it developed. That was not primitive early Christianity, who kind of understood what Jesus was presenting was another way of looking at things, that it wasn't, that the Christian wasn't to conquer with power over or arms or force, but the Christian's strength was in service and love and you know, to the other. It's a real interesting topic. We can't really get into all of it right now, but this psalm or this it's not, oh yeah, this song really raises those issues. Yeah.
So true.
Good question, Don.
Yeah.
Oh, that was Jackie. Sorry.
Sounds cynical every time I bring stuff up.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm feeling much better. Take care.
Great.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.